Syrskyi destroyed a lot of great officers. He broke their spirit. Many officers who showed initiative were just completely sidelined. The army is really depleted right now. We need to strengthen it. With a change at the top, those bad actors, those commanders who did some pretty awful things, will stop. Because now, that kind of behavior isn't encouraged anymore. And I can guarantee you that General Drapatyi does not encourage officers to behave like jerks, and he'll definitely punish that.
After almost 2.5 years in the job, Oleksandr Syrskyi has been dismissed from his post as the Commander-in-Chief of Ukraine's armed forces. On one hand, this change has been closely tied to and even triggered by President Zelensky's dismissal of popular young Defense Minister Mykhailo Fedorov and the ensuing protest movement. On the other hand, criticism of the general has also been building for months and even years because of his supposed Soviet-style methods, highly personalized leadership, and connection to certain very controversial units in the Ukrainian military. Today we're speaking to Ukrainian veteran Bohdan Krotevych, the former chief of staff of the country's legendary Azov Brigade, and since leaving the military over a year ago, now one of the leading and most outspoken critics of Syrskyi and his leadership. We're going to talk about what brought us to this point where he was finally dismissed and what we can expect from the new man in charge, Mykhailo Drapatyi. Don't miss this conversation. Before we continue, I want to remind you that the Kyiv Independent is funded not by billionaires, governments, or grants, but by you, our dear readers and viewers. We here at the Kyiv Independent are doing our best to bring you the deeper story from Ukraine, whether that's from the front line, war crimes investigations, news coverage, or conversations like this. If you appreciate what we do and want to help us keep doing it, please consider becoming a member of the Kyiv Independent community for as little as $5 a month. Thank you. We're recording this 2 days after Syrskyi was dismissed. This is still an ongoing story, which really started about a week ago with Fedorov's firing. Where do you think we are right now? Have we already passed the worst point, or is there still a lot more to come?
We're taking the first step toward fixing all the mistakes that have been made in the army up to this point, and it's going to get much harder from here. I've written about this before and I'll repeat it now. Even back then, I said it would be tough to fix the anti-system that had been created in the army. Now it's even harder. More time has passed and some elements will be even more difficult to correct. So I don't know how the decision about the Chief of the General Staff was made, but I hope Drapatyi was allowed to choose the people he's ready to work with because he's got a lot of work ahead of him. That's if we're talking about the army. If we're talking about the internal political system, I think it's very good that the president made this decision. I'm 99% sure there were a lot of people advising him not to do it. I'm sure many people told him it could be seen as a sign of weakness. But I can speak for myself. I saw it as wisdom and as a sign of real agency. Because a lot of decisions might be, no, not might be, but definitely are, lobbied for by people in the president's circle. And before Drapatyi was appointed, there were so many candidates. And the president made the decision to appoint Drapatyi. I'm almost certain it was his personal decision. I'm almost certain a lot of people were against it. I know for a fact that people, including the former Commander-in-Chief Syrskyi, were bad-mouthing Drapatyi, both at meetings of the staff of the Supreme Commander-in-Chief and directly to the President. So, let's just say, Drapatyi wasn't at the top of the list for people in the President's office. But I think it was the wisest choice. And I can only thank the President for acting with maximum wisdom at this moment of internal political crisis.
By the summer of 2024, I think Syrskyi had been given a bit of a chance, but we were already seeing the consequences, let's say, of a certain management culture at the top, strategic decisions and systemic problems at every level. And since then, we've really seen a negative trajectory, not just at the front, but especially in terms of management and personnel, and that the front and Ukraine's entire defense could gradually suffer, but not in a way that would lead to a breaking point and his dismissal. Did you ever think that was even possible? Did you expect that this kind of chain of events could actually lead to such a decision?
Of course, and one way or another it was bound to happen. I kept saying it would happen sooner or later, but better sooner than later. Now it's happened thanks to Defense Minister Fedorov, because he pointed out the problem. It's one thing when a retired lieutenant colonel says the commander-in-chief is wrong. It's another thing when the defense minister says that Commander-in-Chief Syrskyi is sabotaging, and he really was sabotaging, the army's development. That made it a concrete problem named by a senior official. I'm very grateful to Fedorov for that because it was a risky move, and I'll say this. He acted honorably in this situation. He helped the army a lot. As defense minister, whose job is to actually help the army, he did everything right. If he hadn't done it, it would have happened in a year, maybe a bit more, maybe a bit less. But in about a year, people would have started resisting on their own, but not with cardboard signs. So you have to understand that the days of World War II or World War I with its Western Front are gone. You can't keep things under wraps anymore. Everyone has the internet. Even the soldiers who've been sitting at their positions for 100, 200 days have Starlink and internet access. I recently heard a story about a soldier who'd been at a position for 200 or 300 days, and he just called his brigade commander on Zoom and then shot himself. It's clear that a lot of people in the army are simply exhausted, and when they talk about going AWOL, it's not because they don't want to defend their country, it's because they're burned out. Some of them have been at the front for 10 years or more, can't see their families, can't build a family, and so on. It all adds up over time, so this was bound to happen sooner or later. And Minister Fedorov actually saved the situation from turning into a mutiny, maybe even an armed conflict. I don't know if you went to the protest or not, but there were a lot of veterans there, a lot of people with amputations, active duty soldiers with amputations. I met fellow soldiers from my own brigade, from the Marines, from the defenders of Mariupol, people who'd been in captivity, people who fought here, a lot of people. They came out to stand up for their position. So we have to understand this isn't just about names, it's about how we treat people who are ready to give their lives for the country.
For an international audience who might have just read that Syrskyi is unpopular, that he has this old Soviet mentality, and some even call him a butcher, how would you, not briefly but as clearly as possible, describe the core problem with this person in this position, and why, in your opinion, has his leadership been so damaging for the war over these years?
I think if you asked Oleksandr Syrskyi about his mistakes, he wouldn't be able to answer. And more than that, his answer would probably be something like, my mistake was that I was too soft. Honestly, in my personal opinion, this is a person who will never in his life admit he was wrong about anything. And that's already dangerous. He's someone who lies and has lied to the president a lot, manipulating situations to suit himself. He assigned units the kinds of tasks he did in order to retain his position as commander-in-chief, and he's a total micromanager. I mean, he was all about micromanagement. There's absolutely no delegation. And it's been getting worse and worse. Even when I was chief of staff of the 12th Azov Brigade, I remember Syrskyi personally allocating 5 or 10 anti-personnel mines to each brigade. He had his own reserve of anti-personnel mines as commander-in-chief. He has absolutely no operational vision. I'm not even talking about strategic vision. He doesn't even have operational vision. Right now, the commander-in-chief of the armed forces of Ukraine, General Drapatyi, has 3 reprimands from the previous commander-in-chief, Syrskyi, who was handing out reprimands to everyone, launching internal investigations against everyone, but never, not once, for any mistake or failed operation, did he take responsibility himself. Not once. So, if you lose a position, you face an internal investigation. If you don't complete a task, you face an investigation. Reprimands, 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 but not a single one for Commander-in-Chief Syrskyi, who never took responsibility for anything.
This word responsibility keeps coming up. Just like it did during that press conference by Fedorov, he said very directly and pretty harshly that it just doesn't exist. He also said that everything was being blocked and that there was a lot of lying, but the lack of responsibility, that's obviously closely tied to that Soviet mentality because there were similar processes back then. Do you think this is a product of that school of war and mentality, or is it something personal, something unique about this person's character?
It's absolutely not unique, but it's a combination in this case. There's this totally Soviet system of I'm the boss, you're an idiot. That's what we call it. But on the other hand, I've never seen such extreme bootlicking from a general. When you're in the position of Commander-in-Chief, you're supposed to have your own opinion, your own stance that you can defend in front of your superior. Sure, you might still end up doing what your superior says, but you have to voice your disagreement, say you don't agree with this order, you'll carry it out, but you think differently. I'm not sure Syrskyi has ever once told the president that he disagreed with him about anything, so in my opinion, Syrskyi managed, through sheer sycophancy, to convince almost the entire president's office that there's only one way to fight this war, his way. I know for a fact that a lot of people, even in the army, think that Syrskyi felt the front through this micromanagement. But that's just nonsense. If you could feel the front through micromanagement, then let's make a platoon commander the commander-in-chief, and you'd get exactly what we've seen these past 3 years. Honestly, for me, Syrskyi's level of command is that of a company commander. He's the commander-in-chief. He should be at the command post, looking at the operational and strategic picture. That just wasn't happening.
If we just go back to basics, to strategy, we're fighting a country with a huge advantage in manpower, ammunition, resources. It's a positional war of attrition, so we have to save our own people and kill more of theirs.
That's logical, but for some reason, it's not happening. For some reason, that's not at the center of decision-making. Someone put this idea out there that it's a war of attrition, and whoever gets worn out first loses. I can tell you, and I've been saying this since the very beginning of 2022, if you think this is a war of attrition, then we'll be the ones worn out first. That's it. Yes, maybe our Western partners support us with supplies and money, but not with people. And you can't fight a war without people. Honestly, I don't fully agree with Fedorov's view that we just need to kill more Russians, or that the war can be fought entirely with drones. I see it differently. Again, if we're talking about the tasks in front of us, we have to win this war somehow, because we simply have no other choice. I get that everyone wants it to stop, but for me, that would just mean another war down the line. And then our kids, our grandkids will have to fight, and I don't want that. I believe we can actually win this war with the resources and people we have. We just need to use them properly. But they don't get that up there. I don't know why. And more than that, I'll say this. Zaluzhny said the same thing. He said his mistake was thinking that Russia would stop because of its losses. I wasn't the best student in history class, but I'm pretty sure Russia has never stopped because of losses. Never. For Russia, people are the cheapest resource. Let's put it this way. If we destroy one infantryman and one Russian truck, I think the truck is worth more to Russia than the infantryman. People are just a cheap resource for them, so we need to move away from that thinking.
I wanted to go back to Syrskyi and the real consequences of his years as commander-in-chief, because we know there aren't enough people, that the situation with manpower is difficult. But especially if you look at the course of the war from a distance, it seems like things have gotten better. People are seeing that it's not just about deep strikes and missile strikes developing, but also at the front. Now, during the spring-summer campaign, when there were supposed to be major advances, they're actually very small. How would you explain how bad or good the situation is, and what's Syrskyi's role in all this?
Let me explain. Imagine you've been getting beaten for weeks, and beaten really hard, almost to death. And then for a while the person beating you starts hitting you a bit less hard because they're taking a breather. Is that an improvement or not? I wouldn't call that an improvement. It was really bad. Now it's not quite as bad, but it's still bad. And most likely it'll go back to being really bad again. So people, when they see this, it's normal to celebrate the successes of the armed forces, to climb out of that pit of low morale and so on. But we shouldn't fool ourselves into thinking that just because we started hitting logistics with deep strikes and missile strikes, taking out Russians, that we're suddenly winning.
If we talk about the negative side of the situation we're in now, the main thing, as I understand it, is the chronic crisis with personnel, the lack of people, and so on. On the one hand, the full-scale war has been going on for more than 4 years, and it's clear that even in the best conditions, with more trust in the military and so on, there still wouldn't be enough volunteers. There would still be some forced mobilization, which society wouldn't like, and there would still be a shortage of infantry in the brigades, no matter what. But in your opinion, to what extent is the crisis we're in now, in this regard, a direct result of Syrskyi's leadership?
Well, I'd say about 70%. About 70%. I always say that 30% of the problem is useful idiots in Ukraine and Russian propaganda. If we're talking about mobilization, about the crisis with the territorial recruitment centers and so on, you have to understand that when recruitment officers approach someone who's dodging military service, someone who's supposed to come to the center but doesn't, they don't just invite them, they tell them they're going to the center together. If the person refuses, then force is applied, and this gets caught on camera. Of course, the person starts yelling, they're killing me, help, and so on. Ukrainians, people passing by, can't just ignore something they don't like. Ukrainians are a very unique and interesting nation. They start defending the person even if they don't know them. They try to save them. This is really a kind of savior syndrome. And all this ends up on camera, on people's phones, and on the internet. Of course, it spreads because people are interested in scandals. It sparks emotions. But let's imagine that for every one of these incidents, there are thousands of normal cases where they come up, check a person's documents, everything's in order, and they let them go. I've seen this myself. It's happened right in front of me. In reality, both the police and the recruitment centers are more than law-abiding. But of course, it gets blown up online, and most of it is spread by people who are either dodging military service, because that's how they justify themselves, or living abroad. These are useful idiots. There's Russian propaganda, and then there are useful idiots. And unfortunately, it'll always be like this. But if the situation in the army, and trust in the armed forces leadership, improves now, as I'm sure it will, then we'll gradually close the gap in our defenses, and we'll start building up reserves. Going back to Syrskyi, he knew how to destroy reserves, but he never knew how to build them up. Let me give you some examples. When Syrskyi became Commander-in-Chief, he had reserves, our assault troops, by the way, which he wiped out in the Kursk operation. Then he spread them out along the front. And then he needed to do something, meaning he needed reserves. So he started creating separate assault regiments. And now those units are also standing on the front lines. In other words, there are no reserves. He is not capable of creating reserves. And actually, the principle of building up reserves is pretty basic. It's like saving money. Excuse me for the comparison. You shouldn't throw everything you have straight into the fight. You need to set some aside. And to be able to set aside that percentage and not use it in battle right away, you have to accept it when the president scolds you for some screw-up or whatever and say, "Yes, Mr. President, it's my fault. But this is the situation right now. I need reserves. I need to build them up. Otherwise, I can't do it. Otherwise, it's impossible. You can't fight without reserves. And even when you commit all your reserves to an offensive, you still need to keep a separate reserve in case of success to exploit that success." These are basic things. Foreigners who've served in the military will get this immediately. I'm like, how is this not obvious? But you know, power changes people. Even in the army, power changes people. The way you see the world changes, and this is one of the problems that needs to be solved in every army. In the end, a person has to make the decision, because a person is responsible for the lives of others. I'm not a fan of total AI control, but there has to be a safeguard against human ego, a safeguard against arrogance, against narcissism and sycophancy. Because, unfortunately, in the army and in government, this costs a lot of lives.
That's a good segue into the topic of the distribution and use of assault troops. The criticism started to pick up steam about a year ago. For those who don't know, this is Syrskyi's project, scaling up these assault battalions into regiments and then into full brigades or even corps. One of these regiments has more than 10,000 troops. In the last few months, we've learned about the conditions at their bases, about beatings, torture, even deaths of soldiers. And we're not even talking about how they're used in assaults, like you said about the Russians, how they treat their people. It's a similar attitude. How could this happen in the Ukrainian army where supposedly the life of a soldier is valued. In your opinion, how did it get to this point without any changes? And what's the logic even for Syrskyi, who needs people to fight, if you're just going to burn through them so quickly?
I'm really glad that the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine is now a Ukrainian. I don't consider Oleksandr Syrskyi a Ukrainian. That's the only answer I've come to. I thought about it for a long time and really tried to figure it out. And that's the answer that makes sense to me. From what I've seen, and I've seen a lot of generals, commanders of different branches, forces, and so on, even Sodol, who sent people with minimal equipment on pointless, illogical missions, did it with a kind of holy belief that he was a good soldier. But with Sodol, I don't remember criminal activity, contract killings, and so on in the units under his command. I don't know about others, but I have a pretty strong sense of empathy, and I totally get this question. And it pisses me off. It makes me angry because I can't understand how much of a bastard you have to be to do this to the Ukrainian army.
Just to play devil's advocate, maybe there's the explanation, the answer, is that whoever criticizes the assault troops just doesn't understand what kind of people are coming in through mobilization right now, how hard it is to do anything with them, and how much there's actually a huge need to put out fires because of infiltration, because of critical situations, breakthroughs. That's why there's this need to turn mobilized guys, even those with drug problems and so on, into people who at least know how to storm positions, especially if we're talking about future offensive operations. There is such an argument. How would you respond to that?
People have a short memory. Imagine this. Your house catches fire and you have a fire extinguisher. In theory, the right thing to do is use the fire extinguisher. But if your whole apartment is on fire and there are 10 people inside, you're not just using the extinguisher anymore. You're putting out the fire with whatever you have. Pillows, blankets, your hands, your pants, anything. You have to remember, the situation at the front right now is a direct result of Syrskyi's actions. When Syrskyi became Commander-in-Chief, he had many air assault brigades in reserve. When we were in Liman, when the 12th Azov Brigade was there, the 95th Air Assault Brigade was standing behind us. When Syrskyi became Commander-in-Chief, some brigades were actually on rotation. Now nobody even remembers what rotation is. Nobody knows what battalion level or brigade level coordination looks like anymore. You can't create a situation and then say, I'm acting this way because the situation is like this. First you act, then the situation develops, and then you react to it.
So, speaking about the future and about the army now under the command of Drapatyi, who is Ukrainian, he's someone people have known of him for years, maybe not super well, but they know him as someone who's always been brought up as someone who could have handled things much better. The man people wanted to see replace Syrskyi, and now that has happened. In your opinion, what should people know about him, and why has he earned this kind of reputation over the years?
It's going to be extremely tough for him in this position. Drapatyi is someone who wants to remain a decent human being, and that's admirable. It affects the decisions he makes. Honestly, if he's allowed to put together a good team, he'll succeed. I hope it'll be easier, but it's better to prepare for a tougher period, because Syrskyi, over all this time, put his people everywhere. It's honestly a miracle that some commanders didn't get kicked out of their positions. Just pure luck. I know for a fact that he personally called some of them and straight up told them maybe you should write a resignation letter. That's the kind of command style it was. One Drapatyi isn't going to change everything, if he manages to build a good team. Now the army sees that yes, things are hard when you're a person of principle. You end up with 3 reprimands from the Commander-in-Chief. Drapatyi faced serious repression. And so did people who worked with him, or even those who didn't oppose him. There was constant pressure on them. And now there's a 180-degree shift toward honest reporting and honest actions on the front line. I think this will move the army in a better direction. And I'm really interested to see how the Ukrainian armed forces will fight now with this technological component and an added ground component, meaning infantry, the army, and so on. Because in defense, you can use as many drones as possible and you don't need as many people on the front line. Here, I agree with Fedorov. You don't need that many people on the front line to hold defensive positions. But for an offensive, you need people, infantry, and so on. And I'm curious, I'm actually a bit naive, but I think that if the current command just avoids repeating the mistakes of the previous commander-in-chief and the one before him, if they can learn from others' mistakes, then we'll see some real progress at the front.
So, as a starting point, it's really just this set of values, honor and humanity. That's the main critical change.
That's the foundation that influences decisions. We all need to go back to the doctrines, to the statutes, reread them, and in some places, actually update them to fit the realities of this war. There's definitely stuff to change. But we need to act according to basic logic, basic norms. And these decisions, these orders, are influenced by simple things we're talking about. Honor, dignity, empathy. Someone recently asked me what officers lack the most. And I think it's empathy. That's what we need. If you treat people as just numbers, if you approach war like it's just math, then we've already lost. There's your math. We've lost. What was it all for? But I see it differently. I think war is an art. And even when we're outnumbered, we can still win if we're smarter. History has shown this many, many times. But for some reason, people have a short memory. We forget, and we start making excuses saying, well, that's just the way things are.
About the challenges Drapatyi faces, what do you think can be changed quickly in terms of army management and operations? What will take more time but is still possible with the right approach? And what are the truly systemic problems? What's going to happen with the assault regiments? How do you even begin to start unraveling all of this?
I think there's only one thing to do with the assault regiments, transfer them to the air assault forces. The air assault forces have a great commander, General Apostle, who will know exactly what to do with these assault units. He knows the statutes of the air assault forces inside out, and he'll sort out their tasks and everything else. I believe the main thing, the absolute priority right now, is to redistribute resources according to the real needs of the brigades and the front. Real needs, not personal preferences. I think the temptation to clean house all at once should be resisted because that's a dangerous path. This is what we talked about earlier today. You have to be able to work with people you don't like. That's normal. It's normal not to like someone and for someone to criticize you. Maybe they've even done bad things to you in the past. We know that Drapatyi was given 3 reprimands for no real reason, and some members of Syrskyi's team were involved in that. But despite all that, these people can still be effective in their positions. If that's the case, they should stay. This is something we don't understand in politics either. You have to be able to work with difficult people if they're effective at their jobs. If we properly redistribute resources, if we start gradually changing the army, I think we'll see results next year. We shouldn't expect any big results this year, and let's not forget we're not living in peacetime. The enemy is always there. Right now, a lot of people are talking about Russian mobilization. Things could get tough, and no matter what, it will be tough. A lot of service members are talking about this now, and I'll repeat myself. To those who protested, went to rallies and so on, you now have a real chance to join the army and help change it. Syrskyi destroyed a lot of great officers. He broke their spirit. Many officers who showed initiative were just completely sidelined. The army is really depleted right now, especially at the management level. We need to strengthen it right now. It's like the police reform back in 2014 to 2015, when a lot of young people joined the police and there was a new patrol force. We need to replenish the army, and we need to finally staff the units with people. Second, build up reserves. And third, launch a rotation system where there's training and cohesion. Only after that can we talk about fixed terms of service. This year will be very tough. This winter will be very tough. And we need to start preparing for it now. But again, we have to remember, Ukrainians always show what they're made of when things get really tough. Unfortunately, it takes us a while to get moving, but when the pressure's on, we deliver. It's not just that we can, we always have. When the Russians advance, when things get harder, that's when we get going. For us, it's like a cold shower. I wish it were different, but that's how it is.
You said we'll see changes in a year, maybe next year, but that's still a year away. We'll have to get through another tough winter, maybe even the toughest one. There could be another round of mobilization in Russia, more intensity on the front. If all that happens, but there's a strategy, there's humanity, trust, and there's two-way communication between the general staff and the combat units and corps, where do you think we could be in the war a year from now?
If we don't shoot ourselves in the foot, which we are unfortunately pretty good at, then I think in a year we could have reserves, we could have unit rotations, and that would be a big step forward. But we need to stop promising that we'll win tomorrow, because we're still not winning and people are losing trust. We also have to understand that everyone's tired, first and foremost the military, but also civilians, including women and children who are living under constant stress. Still, we have to continue in this direction. I actually think that Ukrainians, even though they're frustrated and maybe a bit depressed, still understand that we don't have a choice. And we'll keep going. I hope so. I really do. In fact, I'd actually ask, maybe this could be made public at some point. I'm really interested in the statistics on how many of those who went AWOL are coming back now over the next 2 or 3 months. I don't know whether more people will start volunteering to join the army now, because you can't just flip a switch and expect everyone to show up tomorrow. The system itself needs to change a bit and show that it's changed. With a change at the top, those bad actors, those commanders who did some pretty awful things, will stop, because they'll be afraid. Because now, that kind of behavior isn't encouraged anymore. And I can guarantee you 100% that General Drapatyi does not encourage officers to behave like jerks, and he'll definitely punish that.
As the political crisis surrounding the dismissal of Defense Minister Mykhailo Fedorov continues, so does our coverage of it here at the Kyiv Independent on all our platforms from all angles possible. If you don't want to miss out on everything we do, make sure to like and subscribe here, and to support our work, please consider becoming a member of the Kyiv Independent. Thank you.